Okay, so what I want to do here is basically show you a few examples of policy briefs that have been submitted in previous semesters. And I want you to have a sense of what makes a good policy brief versus what makes a so-so policy brief versus what makes a bad policy brief. So we're going to start with this brief, which actually got an A minus grade. And you'll see that all the needed elements of a successful policy brief are here. You have a nice visual balance, I would say. There's nice colors that are not too bright. Soft colors are always better than bright colors. So you have this light blue up here. You have, this orange that is not too bright. Then you have nice pictures, very nice visual components of it. There's a map down here. Each one of the figures has a really good, simple caption. Make sure that you credit the owner of the figure or the picture every time you include one. There's a nice summary here. Then you have the context, and you keep going down. And you have those visual aids that I mentioned in a different video. You have the current policies right there. If you keep going down, you'll see more visual aids. A text box right here talking about cover crops. In this particular case, it's an important component of the brief. Then you go to the alternative policies. And finally, you have the conclusion and the references. Note that this is 4 pages long. Also note that there's not a lot of blank spaces in the brief. Sometimes people just finish with half a page and the rest of the page is all blank. That's usually not a good idea. Try to balance the brief as to occupy all the space you have in the page if possible. A few things that are important too in terms of representation: always include the page numbers. And the other thing that you have to take into account is that you don't need to include the title of the class. Here in this case it was ENR 4000. In our case it would be ENR 3200. If possible, try not to do that, because the idea here is that you can use this policy brief in the future if you're, for instance, applying for jobs and your potential employer wants to see examples of your work. I've had a number of students that actually have reached out to me in the last few years saying, hey, by the way, the policy brief I wrote for your class really helped me out, and it was part of my portfolio when I applied for a job, and it basically helped me show that I can write and that I can communicate complex ideas in a rather simple manner. So make sure you do that. Okay, that's an A brief. Let's go to a B brief. In this case, you'll notice that it just doesn't look as good as the A brief. In fact, this was a B minus, almost verging on a C. There are a few good things about this brief. The first one is that there's a lot of good research. This author also included these key messages, which might be a good idea sometimes, particularly if the summary is too long, like it was in this case. I think the summary needed to be a little bit shorter here. But it's a very well-researched brief. The title is a little bit too long, but again, it's a decent brief, and that's why it got a B minus. It's also on harmful algal blooms in Lake Erie, which is a topic that I required every student to write the brief on. Now it's different. You can write the brief on whatever topic you want. But let's keep going. There's no page numbers in this brief. There's one visual aid here, this figure. Notice that there's a problem here with the figure. Let's see if I can make it bigger so you can see. This is a figure that comes from a different source, which is good. You can do that. But if you pick up a figure from a source that you find online, then this area of the figure here would need to be modified, because it's not figure 3 or 5. It's whatever figure you have in the brief in that order. And by the way, in this case, this would be figure 1, and obviously this would be figure 2. So the student actually wrote figure 2 here, but all the information here, it's not consistent, right? Because it says figure 3 to 5. So you would need at least to delete this and then simply include the title of the figure that you have. Of course, you still have to make sure that you include the information about who produced the figure, which is right here. So you would have to do that. Okay, so this is a B right? Notice it's very well researched, but look at all the references. One of the things that I said is that if you go over 10 references, you are probably writing something that is not a policy brief. And so there's too many references in this one, I would say. Go from 5 to 10, okay? But it was a well-researched brief that could be more balanced from a visual standpoint. It's kind of a boring brief to look at, right? It's all white. There's a few figures, but it's just kind of boring. It could be better. Let's go to a C brief. Now you start seeing things that are not that great. First, look at this title. This title is not good. It's too long. By the way, the columns should be up here. I mean, it's not nice to look at, right? It's very well researched too. I mean, there was a lot of effort put into writing this thing, but it's just not good. It's just one column, kind of boring. Context and importance of the issue, no page numbers. The student hit all the guidelines that we had in terms of what are the components. So you have the title, you have the executive summary here. You have the context and importance of the issue. You have the current policies, and you have the alternative policy offers or policy actions. But it just doesn't look good. So that's why it's a C. The references is good, but this is also something that I was telling you before, right? When you leave half a page blank, it doesn't look that great. So anyways, and by the way, this was a brief that was clearly over the limit that we gave the students to do. So if the student had actually done this in 2 columns and come closer to the edges, the student would have probably been able to write a 4-page policy brief. Okay, now let's go to a D brief. A D brief, now you see we're getting very dangerously close to an F, right? This is definitely not fun to look at. Again, 1 column, no visual aids, no color. The title is in the same font size than the rest of the brief. Definitely not something that is engaging from a visual standpoint. I would say if you gave me this to read about any topic, you gave me a brief that looks like this, I would probably not read it, to tell you the truth. So there might be a lot of good information here. And of course we read it because we had to grade it. But in real life, if you gave me something that looks like this, I would probably assume that the person is not being as careful, as detail-oriented, as professional as they could be. So I would probably not even read it. I would just look at the figures here, right? So, boring, lots of things that are not there. But because there was a decent amount of research, we decided to give this brief a passing grade, even though it's not a good brief. And let's go finally with the last one of the bunch, the F brief. Well, here you have it. This is something that definitely doesn't even get over a minimum threshold of quality, right? You have a very ineffective title that used the word ineffective in it, ineffective voluntary policies. Not a good title, doesn't tell you anything about the topic. The title of a brief should always tell you something about the topic, right? So if you're writing about harmful algal blooms, you should find a way of including that in the title. If you're writing about bee colony collapse, you should be able to either include it in the title or at least give a visual aid next to the title that shows the reader what the brief is about. And that's not here. Really, really bad, really poor. 2 works cited, both of them are websites, clearly insufficient work. This is an F. Okay, well, I'm going to upload this video, and also I'm going to include a few examples of the brief so you can actually take a look at it. I'm going to include the A brief and the B brief so you can look at them, and they're going to be under this video in links provided under this video. Okay, all right, that's it for this description of different policy briefs. I hope you find value in this. And if you have any questions about how to write the briefs or the topic or whatever, just reach out to us. Thank you.